If you're hearing the ocean right now, don't panic. You're not inside a seashell. You've just stepped into the story of the Maldives, a place where the water is so blue it looks like someone spilled sky paint all over the Indian Ocean. Now, before you get too comfortable, let me warn you, this isn't your usual paradise postcard story. This is about her, the woman whose name floats through Maldivian history like perfume on sea wind. Some call her an enchantress, others just a misunderstood royal with a flair for drama. Either way, her story starts here, where the ocean hums and history naps under the sun. So settle in, pull your blanket up. Let's drift back a few centuries to when the Maldives wasn't just a tourist hotspot with fancy resorts, but a quiet kingdom made of coral and courage. The islands back then were smaller, softer, and simpler. No airplanes, no honeymoon packages, just fishing boats, palm trees that bent like lazy guards, and villages that lived by the rhythm of waves. People believed the sea had moods, calm one day, stormy the next, a bit like royal families if we're being honest. And at the center of this watery kingdom stood a palace. Not a massive stone castle like in Europe, no dragons, no knights, just a large white structure with coral walls, open windows, and a sea breeze that refused to respect privacy. Inside lived the royal family, rulers who measured wealth not by gold, but by pearls, trade spice, and the number of islands under their care. Our story begins when the court was buzzing about a child born under a sky full of strange light. Some said it was a blessing from the sea spirits. Others said it was just a full moon with attitude. Either way, everyone knew she wasn't ordinary. They called her Amina, a name that meant peace. Ironically, peace would be the last thing she brought to anyone's life later on. But for now, baby Amina was just adorable, wrapped in silk, sleeping like a little secret the world hadn't discovered yet. She grew up fast, surrounded by coconut-scented air, storytellers, and songs about the sea. The palace tutors tried to teach her history and politics, but she was more interested in the rhythm of waves, the stories of sailors, and the quiet power of watching without speaking. She had this calm confidence, the kind that made people either trust you or fear you, depending on their guilt level. When Amina was a child, she'd wander the beaches barefoot, talking to crabs and pretending the horizon was her kingdom. Servants said she could sit for hours just staring at the water, as if she was listening to something the rest of them couldn't hear. Some thought it was imagination, others thought she was chosen. Either way, it made people talk. And in small kingdoms, gossip travels faster than wind. As she grew, her charm became obvious, but not in a flashy way. She wasn't the kind of beauty that made people gasp. She had this calm smile, the kind you can't tell is friendly or dangerous. You know, like when someone says, "Don't worry, I've got a plan," and you're suddenly very worried. By her teenage years, Amina had turned into the quiet center of palace life. Ministers tried to impress her. Artists painted her, and old women whispered that her eyes could read truth from lies. Whether or not that was true, she never corrected them. She just smiled, that same calm, knowing smile. But behind the soft waves and gentle manners, the palace was not all peace and poetry. Court politics were messy. There were rival families, jealous siblings, and one very watchful queen who didn't like anyone stealing the spotlight, especially not a younger woman who could silence a room just by entering it. Still, Amina stayed graceful. She wasn't loud or ambitious. She had this way of letting people underestimate her, and then quietly rearranging the chessboard while they were distracted. Some called it intelligence, some called it sorcery. Personally, I'd call it strategy with extra sparkle. Now, the Maldives was a peaceful place on the surface, but like any ocean, there were hidden currents. Foreign merchants came and went, bringing tales from Arabia, India, and Africa. The islands were tiny crossroads in a big world, and somewhere between trade deals and tea, Whispers of the princess with the silver eyes started spreading beyond the palace walls. Was she really that beautiful? That clever? That mysterious? Nobody could agree, but everyone had an opinion. Fishermen swore they saw her walking the beach alone at night, her white dress glowing in the moonlight. Scholars said she knew ancient verses no one had taught her, and one old guard claimed she could calm storms just by singing. The man also claimed his parrot spoke 5 languages, so maybe take that one lightly. What's certain is that by the time Amina turned 18, she wasn't just a princess, she was a myth in progress, the kind that keeps growing every time someone retells it. And the sea seemed to know it too. Locals said the tides changed whenever she was angry. Maybe coincidence, maybe not. But you can't deny that the ocean loves a bit of drama. As her name spread, so did her influence. People began seeking her advice, hoping her calm eyes could see solutions where others saw chaos. Some left with blessings, others left confused, but nobody ever forgot her. And that's how it began, quietly, beautifully, like the start of a song you don't realize will haunt you later. A girl with moonlight in her eyes and an ocean's patience in her heart. Before she would become the woman history renamed the Enchantress of the Isles. But for now, she's just Amina, walking barefoot along the shore, her reflection mixing with the waves, unaware of the legend she's about to become. So take a breath. Let the sound of the sea fade in. The night is long, and her story's just beginning. Before Amina became a name that made people whisper, she lived in a world that looked almost unreal. A kingdom floating on the edge of the Indian Ocean, shining like scattered pearls under the sun. The Maldives back then wasn't the picture-perfect resort world we see on travel ads. There were no sun loungers, no buffets, and definitely no Wi-Fi. Just hundreds of tiny coral islands stitched together by stories, tides, and trade. It was beautiful, yes, but also fragile, like glass resting on water. The people lived close to the sea, not just by it, but with it. The ocean was their road, their food, their neighbor, and sometimes their boss. Every morning, fishermen sailed out in wooden boats carved by hand, whispering a prayer before the first paddle touched water. And every evening, women waited on the shore, reading the waves to guess what kind of day the sea had decided to give them.
Life was peaceful in the Maldives, if you ignored the occasional storm or political squabble. But inside the palace, things were, let's say, a little less peaceful. Palaces, no matter where they are, have a funny habit. From the outside, they look calm and royal. But inside, it's mostly gossip, secrets, and people pretending to like each other at breakfast. The royal palace of Malé, the capital island, was no exception. It was a long, low structure made from coral blocks, shining white by day, glowing gold by sunset. The air smelled of jasmine and sea salt, and the floors were so polished that servants probably learned how to skate by accident. At its center was the royal courtyard, a quiet garden where the queen often sat, pretending to read poetry, but mostly listening for rumors. She was a proud woman, the queen, elegant, commanding, and very aware that every eye in the palace was watching her. But lately, one pair of eyes had started to outshine her, Amina's. Now, Amina wasn't trying to steal the spotlight. She didn't need to. She had that calm kind of presence that worked like gravity. People just drifted toward her. Ministers came to ask advice, servants told her jokes, and even the royal parrots preferred sitting near her window. The queen noticed. And queens usually notice everything. But before jealousy started brewing, life in the palace moved to its steady rhythm. The royal family held councils under coconut trees, merchants brought spices and silk from faraway ports, and the smell of cooked tuna and cinnamon filled the courtyards each afternoon. In those days, the Maldives was known as the Islands of the Moon. Traders from Arabia, India, and Africa stopped there to rest, sell their goods, and maybe share a story or two. You could hear 5 languages in one market and taste 10 kinds of curry before noon. It was a small kingdom with a big heart, quiet, welcoming, and slightly chaotic in the best way. Amina grew up watching this world like a gentle observer. She didn't chase the spotlight, she just seemed to glow in it accidentally. When guests visited, she'd stand behind her mother, silent but alert, noticing everything. The way a merchant avoided eye contact when lying, the way guards stiffened when news arrived from the north. She learned that power wasn't always loud. Sometimes it just listened. By the time she reached her 20s, Amina understood the unspoken rules of the palace better than anyone. She could read the room faster than the court scribe could read a scroll, and she learned that every smile at court came with a small price tag attached. Compliments weren't free, they were investments. Still, Amina kept her distance. While others fought for influence, she preferred quiet corners, sitting by the window with a cup of tea, drawing patterns in the condensation on the glass. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was strategy. And the more she said nothing, the more everyone wanted to know what she was thinking. Outside the palace walls, the common people adored her. When she walked through the market, children followed her like ducklings. Fishermen would bow slightly, and old women would whisper blessings under their breath. Some said she brought luck. Others said she just made people feel calm, like the sea before dawn. And maybe that was her gift. She made peace look powerful. But while Amina was out there, smiling and listening, the queen was watching, always watching. She noticed how the ministers laughed a little too easily when Amina entered. She noticed how the people cheered louder for her than for the throne itself. And she didn't like it one bit. Still, the queen was clever. She didn't confront Amina directly. Oh no. Royal families rarely shout. They just smile harder and plan slower. And so, in the quiet halls of coral, something unspoken began. A kind of invisible chess game between the crown and the girl with moonlit eyes. Meanwhile, Amina continued her days as usual. She helped the royal healers gather herbs, visited the old storytellers to hear local legends, and often sat by the seawall at dusk, listening to the waves hum their endless tune. The servants said she was searching for something in those waves. Maybe truth, maybe peace, or maybe just a good reason to escape another boring dinner meeting. One evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, Amina looked out at the ocean and said softly, "People forget that silence is also a kind of language." The guard standing nearby nodded like he understood, but he didn't. He was mostly wondering when dinner was. That's the thing about Amina. Even when she said little things, they sounded like riddles. And in a palace where everyone was constantly talking, her silence became its own kind of power. As months passed, visitors began arriving with stories, some strange, some flattering, all exaggerated. A scholar from India brought rare manuscripts and asked to meet the princess who spoke to the sea. A sailor claimed she could predict tides, and one poet declared that her smile could end wars. Amina laughed at that one. She said, "If my smile could end wars, then someone better send me to a few meetings." Her humor was light, never cruel. But behind it, She understood what those stories meant. People were turning her into something larger than life, a symbol, a legend in progress. And legends, as history often proves, can be both a blessing and a curse. For now, though, Amina didn't fight it. She simply let the stories float around her like sea breeze, soft, unstoppable, and a little mysterious. The palace, for all its secrets and jealousies, remained calm for a while. The queen smiled through her unease, the ministers stayed polite, and the waves kept whispering, as if they already knew this peace wouldn't last forever. Because beneath the beauty of the kingdom, something was stirring, quiet as a ripple, steady as a tide. The kind of silence that comes just before history changes direction. Every story about greatness starts somewhere. A storm, a prophecy, a family argument about who gets the last mango. For Amina, the story of her enchantment, as later generations would call it, began with something far less dramatic. A misunderstanding and a moon. Let's go back for a moment to the night she was born. The sky was glowing silver, brighter than usual. Some said it was a lunar eclipse, others said it was just a really clean sky. But the royal astrologer, a man who never wasted a chance to sound mysterious, declared, "A child born tonight will hold the calm of the sea and the power of the moon." People nodded, because that's what you do when someone in a shiny hat says big things. But the words stuck. Calm of the sea, power of the moon. From her first day, Amina was already half human, half headline. Her early years passed quietly. She didn't cry much, didn't fuss, and when everyone else panicked during a storm, baby Amina just watched the rain with big, curious eyes, as if she and the weather were having a private chat. Some said she was blessed. Others said she was just weirdly chill for a baby. Her mother, the queen, was both proud and cautious. She saw the way people talked about her daughter, how they whispered when she walked past. And while she loved Amina deeply, she also knew the royal court loved drama even more. And a mysterious princess, that was drama on a silver platter. As Amina grew older, she became one of those people who could walk into a noisy room and make it quiet. Not because she demanded attention, but because she didn't. She'd sit quietly, smile softly, and suddenly everyone else would start checking if they were being too loud. That kind of energy is rare. Calm, but commanding, like a soft breeze that somehow moves mountains. Her tutors said she was bright. Her handmaids said she was kind. And the palace gossip said, "She's definitely going to cause trouble one day." Gossip, as usual, was ahead of its time. One thing Amina loved was listening, not just to people, but to everything. Birds, footsteps, the ocean, even the silence between two sentences. Her favorite spot was a tall coral wall overlooking the sea. She'd sit there for hours sketching little patterns in the sand or tracing the outlines of waves with a stick. When someone once asked what she was drawing, she replied, "I'm trying to copy the sound of water." No one knew what that meant, but it sounded deep, so they let her continue. By the time she was 13, visitors to the palace started noticing her too. Merchants, scholars, even passing sailors. They'd meet her once and then talk about her for weeks. "She listens like she already knows what you're going to say," one merchant claimed. "She speaks like she's thinking in music," said another. And one sailor, after talking to her for 5 minutes, said he forgot what question he'd asked. To be fair, that sailor forgot a lot of things, so maybe that's not the best example. Still, Amina's reputation grew, not because she tried, but because people loved adding sparkle to a story. The simple truth was, she was just different. Not louder, not smarter, just tuned to a quieter frequency that made others curious. Now, every kingdom loves a mystery, but mysteries can make powerful people nervous. And in this case, one powerful person, the queen, began to feel it. She still loved her daughter, but she didn't love the idea of everyone else loving her more. So, she decided to control the story. She began calling Amina the moon's child in public speeches, turning her into a symbol, not a rival. A royal charm meant to show that the Maldives was blessed by the heavens. Clever, right? If you can't stop the legend, join it. Amina didn't mind. She liked being left alone. As long as she could walk by the sea, feed the palace birds, and read her old poetry scrolls, she was content. But deep down, she was starting to notice something strange. People didn't just admire her, they started to expect things from her. They'd bring her sick animals, broken objects, even small personal problems, hoping her moon-born magic could fix them. At first, she found it sweet, then confusing, and finally exhausting. One night, she asked her old nursemaid, "Why do they think I can help everyone?" The woman smiled and said, "Because hope is a habit, child. You just remind them of it." That answer stuck with her. Hope was a habit, and somehow she had become that habit for the whole island. Years passed, and Amina turned into a young woman who carried both the calm of her name and the weight of everyone's imagination. Whenever she entered a room, conversations softened. Whenever she laughed, people felt better about their day. And whenever she frowned, well, that rarely happened. But when it did, the entire palace went quiet for an hour. Still, for all the stories told about her, Amina herself remained a mystery even to those closest to her. She didn't gossip, didn't boast, and didn't seem to want anything. Not jewels, not power, not praise. If anything, she wanted space. And in a small island court filled with talkers, that made her both fascinating and confusing. Somewhere in all that calm, though, something inside her was changing. She began to realize how easily people's moods shifted around her, how a small smile could make a guard confess something, or how a soft word could make a minister suddenly agree with her. At first, she found it funny. "Maybe I'm part coconut," she joked once. "Everyone listens, but no one understands what I'm saying." But slowly, curiosity turned into awareness. And awareness, that quiet kind, can turn into power before you even notice it happening. By her 18th year, Amina had become more than just a royal daughter. She was the quiet center of every story, the favorite topic at every dinner, and the reason the court astrologer kept pretending to be busy with moon charts. She didn't know it yet, but her calm, charming presence was starting to pull people in, like tides toward a hidden current. And the thing about tides is they always move both ways. For now, the sea around her still whispered softly, like an old friend humming a secret. And somewhere between that hum and the palace walls, the legend of the Enchantress of the Isles began, not with spells or magic, but with silence, curiosity, and a girl who didn't realize that being noticed was the most dangerous gift of all. If the sea could talk, it would probably tell you that beauty is a lot like sunlight on water. Dazzling, yes, but always moving. And in the Maldives, beauty was everywhere. In the coral reefs, the colorful sails, the laughter of people who lived half their lives barefoot. But even in a place that lovely, Amina somehow stood out. She didn't plan to. She wasn't one of those "look at me" types. Her beauty was quieter, like the way waves roll in without asking for attention. It wasn't just her face, It was the way she carried herself, calm and unbothered, like she knew something the rest of the world hadn't figured out yet. The people of the islands began to talk about her the way fishermen talk about a perfect catch, part admiration, part disbelief. Some said her eyes looked like the inside of shell shells. Others swore she could make you forget your worries just by smiling. One old poet even wrote, "She walks like a tide that knows where it's going." Not bad, considering he probably wrote it while half asleep in a hammock. Inside the palace, however, all that admiration was, well, inconvenient. Too much praise can make royal hallways echo in the wrong direction. Ministers started competing for her attention, and even visiting merchants brought her little gifts, shells carved into flowers, pieces of amber polished by waves, bits of poetry tucked into letters. Amina always accepted these with a polite smile, then promptly gave most of them away to children or servants. She'd say, "Pretty things look better when they move," handing off another necklace. It made her even more adored, which, ironically, made her life harder. Being modest in a royal court is like showing up to a sword fight with a spoon. Admirable, but risky. Meanwhile, the queen watched all this unfold with that perfect, calm royal face that usually means, "I'm not angry, but I'm definitely planning something." She couldn't stop people from loving Amina, but she could remind them who actually wore the crown. So, during ceremonies, she began making small moves, calling Amina to stand beside her, speaking for her, deciding when she should smile. To outsiders, it looked affectionate. Inside the palace, everyone knew it was strategy. Amina, of course, noticed. She noticed everything. But instead of reacting, she simply stepped aside. She learned that in a court full of noise, silence was the strongest reply. Her calmness confused people. Some thought it was humility. Others thought it was arrogance in disguise. Truth was, it was neither. She just didn't like to waste words. She'd rather let time do the talking. And time was a patient storyteller.
Still, rumors have a way of multiplying faster than crabs on a beach. Soon, people began saying she wasn't entirely human. A sea-blessed princess, they called her, the kind who could charm a whole kingdom without trying. Now, if this were a fairy tale, that's where the glowing magic would appear. But in real life, the magic was simply presence, the art of being both kind and unreadable at the same time. Everywhere she went, people noticed small coincidences. A bad day suddenly got better after she spoke. A lost boat returned safely after she visited the harbor. When you live on small islands, patterns become stories, and stories quickly become legends. So it wasn't long before everyone decided that Amina was lucky. Whether she liked it or not, she had become the living good luck charm of the kingdom. The court musicians began adding her name to songs. The storytellers included her in old myths, sometimes as a goddess, sometimes as a mysterious girl who spoke with the sea. And the painters, oh, they had a field day. Her portraits appeared everywhere, on tapestries, scrolls, even carved into coral tablets that were meant to honor the royal family, though everyone knew who the main feature was. Amina tried to laugh it off. "If I have to smile for one more painting," she joked, "I'll turn into one." But fame is like perfume, pleasant at first, until it sticks to everything. The palace soon became a stage. Visitors from distant islands asked to meet the Moon Princess. Sailors brought her pearls for blessings. Even the foreign ambassadors, trained in the art of politeness, found themselves oddly nervous when she entered the room. One reportedly forgot his entire speech and just stood there blinking while Amina offered her tea. To her credit, she didn't laugh. She just waited until he remembered what planet he was on. Still, while all this was happening outside, something quieter was happening inside.
Amina began to feel the strange weight that comes with admiration. It sounds nice, but it's heavy, like wearing a crown made of seashells. Beautiful, but it pinches. She couldn't go anywhere without people watching. Every word, every gesture became part of the myth. Even her silences were given meanings she never intended. So, she did what she always did when life got noisy. She went to the sea. That stretch of sand behind the palace became her refuge. She'd walk there at twilight, barefoot, her dress brushing against the waves, listening to the same ocean that had watched her grow up. Sometimes she'd talk to it softly, as if expecting an answer. "I didn't ask for this," she whispered. The ocean never replied, but the waves always rolled in, a small comfort, like an old friend saying, "I know." Back in the palace, the queen was still trying to keep control of the narrative. She ordered Amina to attend more public ceremonies, hoping to direct her daughter's popularity towards the royal image. It worked, in a way, but it also made them compare them two more often. And comparisons in royal families are as dangerous as storms in small boats. Yet Amina remained steady. The gossip, the expectations, the quiet tension with the queen. She carried it all with that same gentle smile. She wasn't pretending to be perfect. She just didn't want to feed the noise. When her maid once asked her how she stayed so calm, Amina replied, "Because I know everything changes. Even waves go out after they come in." Her words spread around the palace, turning into yet another legend. People began quoting her as if she were a philosopher. And maybe she was, just not the kind who writes books, the kind who teaches through stillness. By the end of that year, it was clear. Amina wasn't just a princess anymore. She had become a symbol, the calm face of a kingdom that believed its good fortune came from her presence. Some adored her for it. Others envied her. But nobody, not even the queen, could ignore her. And that's how beauty, quiet, effortless, and slightly dangerous, bewitched a whole kingdom. Not through spells or secrets, but through patience, peace, and a smile that seemed to hold 1,000 unspoken things. Every legend needs a turning point. For Amina, it began on an afternoon so hot that even the sea looked tired. The palace guards leaned on their spears, half asleep. Somewhere, a musician was trying to tune a drum but gave up halfway. Life in the islands had that lazy rhythm, the kind where even important things happen slowly. That day, a ship arrived from the southern atolls. It carried merchants, a few travelers, and one young soldier named Rafe. He wasn't royal, but he wasn't ordinary either. People said he was brave, but not the loud kind of brave, more the quiet, dependable type who'd rather fix a sail than make speeches. His name meant kind in the old island language, and for once, the name actually fit. Rafe came to the capital as part of a guard exchange program, a fancy way of saying extra security for the royal court. Nobody paid much attention to him at first. He was polite, respectful, and seemed content just standing by the palace gates. Until, one evening, the princess walked past. Now, let's be clear. It wasn't some dramatic movie moment. There was no slow-motion breeze, no glowing light from the heavens. She simply looked up, smiled politely, and thanked him for holding the door. But for Rafe, that was enough. He didn't fall in love instantly. No, it was slower than that. More like the tide creeping up the shore, inch by inch, until you realize your feet are already wet. Every time she passed, he noticed small things. How she tilted her head when listening, how she never walked too fast, how her calmness seemed to silence even the most restless corners of the palace. To his surprise, Amina noticed him too. Maybe it was his quiet focus.
Maybe it was because he didn't treat her like a myth or miracle. Whatever it was, she began greeting him more often, asking small things like, "How's the guard post today?" Or, "Did the sea treat you kindly this morning?" Simple words, but for Rafe, they carried more weight than gold. Soon, she learned he came from one of the desert islands, a place where sand dunes stretched farther than the eye could see, and rain was as rare as silence in the royal court. "You must miss the sea," she said once. He smiled shyly. "Sometimes. But sand has its own kind of ocean. It just doesn't move as much." Their conversations stayed light, small moments stolen between duties and ceremonies. But in a world where every move was watched, those tiny conversations felt like entire worlds. Amina, for once, didn't feel like a symbol or a painting. She felt human, laughing softly, teasing him about his sunburn, listening to stories about faraway winds. And Rafe? He felt like the luckiest man alive, even if he never dared to say so out loud. But word travels faster than the tide. Soon the palace started whispering. Servants giggled behind curtains, guards raised eyebrows, and the queen? Oh, she noticed. Of course she did. Queens always do. At first, she ignored it. "Just a passing distraction," she told her advisor. But when she saw Amina smile during a ceremony, really smile, not the royal polite version, something shifted. The queen didn't like losing control of the story, not one bit. Meanwhile, Amina's evenings grew quieter. She'd sneak down to the courtyard garden where Rafe often stood guard. They'd talk about little things, the smell of rain, the sound of drums from the village, the stars that seemed close enough to touch.
He once told her, "Out on my island, we navigate by stars, but here, I think I just follow your voice." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "Then you'll get lost. My voice changes with the wind." It wasn't a love story full of promises. It was something gentler. Two souls meeting in the middle of a noisy world. But peace never lasts long in palaces. One night, a visiting noble saw them talking and decided gossip was more valuable than gold. By morning, the story had grown wings. Some said the princess had fallen for a common soldier. Others said the soldier used tricks to win her attention. The truth, as usual, was somewhere in between. Quiet, harmless, and completely misunderstood. The queen summoned Amina. Her tone was calm, but her eyes were sharp. "My daughter, you must understand that hearts are dangerous things in royal families. They don't belong entirely to us." Amina listened silently. She didn't argue. She didn't plead. She simply nodded and said, "He never asked for my heart, mother. He only spoke kindly." But kindness was already too much. That evening, Rafe was reassigned to another post, far from the palace, near the outer gates. A polite demotion, wrapped in royal paperwork. He didn't protest. Soldiers rarely do. He just bowed and said, "Tell the princess I wish her peace." Amina never saw him again after that day. Some said he was sent back to his island. Others whispered he joined a trade ship and sailed away, following stars that no longer guided him home. Either way, his story ended quietly, like a candle snuffed out before dawn. But something had changed in Amina. The calmness remained, but it was heavier now, like a sea holding secrets. When servants asked if she was all right, she smiled and said, "The ocean keeps what it must, so will I." The people never knew the details. All they saw was a princess who looked serene as ever and a soldier who vanished without noise. And in the stillness that followed, legends began to form. Some said she'd broken his heart.
Others said she'd saved him from a curse. But those who truly watched her eyes knew it wasn't power or magic that haunted her. It was memory. Because sometimes the saddest part of love isn't the ending, it's how quietly it leaves, like waves retreating before anyone notices the shore has gone cold. In every palace, there are two kinds of eyes, the kind that see what's in front of them and the kind that see everything else. The queen, of course, had both. She had ruled long enough to know that power wasn't in the crown or the throne. It was in the quiet, in the moments when people thought no one was watching. After the soldier was gone, the queen didn't relax. She had learned something about her daughter in those few weeks. Amina wasn't just beautiful or calm, she was beloved. And in kingdoms, love can be more dangerous than rebellion. The queen wasn't cruel. She wasn't the villain that bedtime stories like to create. She was, in many ways, just tired of fighting to keep control of the story, tired of being compared to her own daughter, tired of pretending that envy didn't sting. But she couldn't let that show. So she did what clever rulers do. She turned her worry into strategy. She began to observe Amina more closely. Not through confrontation, oh no, that would be too obvious. She did it with smiles, with gentle questions, with motherly advice that sounded warm but felt like a net. "How was your walk by the sea today?" she'd ask casually. "Lovely. The waves were calmer than yesterday." "And who did you speak to?" "Just the wind, mother. It's the only one that listens properly." The queen smiled at that, half amused, half suspicious. Amina's calmness had always puzzled her. How could someone live in a palace full of whispers and still sleep peacefully at night? So she watched, quietly, constantly, and with a patience only royalty can afford. Ministers noticed the change. The queen now attended every event, every feast, every ceremony where Amina was present. Her gaze followed her daughter like a lighthouse beam, steady, bright, and impossible to escape. Amina, of course, pretended not to notice. Pretending was a royal survival skill, but sometimes when she looked at her reflection, she wondered if even the sea had eyes hidden beneath its calm surface. The courtiers noticed too. Some whispered that the queen feared being replaced. Others believed she was simply protecting the princess from another scandal. But no one dared to speak too loudly. The palace had a way of turning gossip into ghosts. Meanwhile, Amina continued her quiet routines. Morning prayers, afternoon readings, twilight walks by the sea. But something in her rhythm had changed. Her laughter came less often. Her voice grew softer, as if afraid to be overheard. Even her favorite maid said, "You smile the same, but your eyes have gone to sleep." Still, she carried on. That was her strength. Not defiance, but grace under pressure. She never shouted, never argued. She simply let time move, trusting it would untangle the knots she couldn't. But the queen wasn't waiting for time. She had begun a new kind of plan, one that would make her daughter's influence useful to the throne. She arranged more public appearances, more blessings, more charity events. If they adore you, then let their love serve the kingdom. Amina nodded politely, but inside, she felt like a painting being carried from hall to hall, admired but never free. The queen's intentions weren't all bad. In her own way, she wanted to protect Amina from rumors, from heartbreak, from the unpredictable waves of public favor. But control disguised as care still feels like a cage, no matter how golden it looks. Then came the Festival of Waves, the biggest celebration of the year. It was a time when the people thanked the sea for its gifts.
Boats were decorated with flowers, songs echoed across the islands, and everyone dressed in shades of blue and silver. Tradition said the royal family must lead the first prayer at sunset. That evening, Amina stood beside her mother, the ocean glowing like molten glass behind them. The crowd watched in silence, and for a moment, it was perfect, peaceful, timeless, beautiful. But as the drums slowed and the prayer ended, Amina looked toward the horizon and thought she saw something. A small ship leaving the harbor, sails dark against the fading light. She didn't move, didn't speak, but her fingers tightened slightly around her bracelet, the one she'd quietly kept since Rafe's departure. The queen noticed. Later that night, as the palace quieted, the queen entered Amina's chamber. The moonlight painted long silver lines across the floor. "You were distracted during the ceremony," she said softly. Amina looked up from her window. "Just thinking." "About what?" "The sea. It never really lets go, does it?" The queen sighed, not in anger but in something close to sadness. "Daughter, the sea has taken many things from our family. Don't let it take you too." Amina smiled faintly. "Maybe it's not taking me. Maybe it's just reminding me where I came from." That night, after the queen left, she couldn't sleep. For the first time in years, she felt uncertain.
Her watchfulness had given her control, but it had also built a distance she didn't know how to cross. She stood by her own window, looking out at the same sea, and whispered, "She's becoming someone I don't understand." Down below, Amina whispered something too, to the waves, not the wind this time. "Keep my secret safe," she said. And the ocean, loyal as ever, whispered back in foam and rhythm. From that night onward, their relationship changed. The queen remained watchful, but her eyes softened. She still planned, still maneuvered, but there was hesitation now, the kind that comes from realizing your daughter is no longer a child, and perhaps never truly was. In the palace, people noticed that mother and daughter no longer argued silently. They simply existed beside each other, two tides moving in different directions, but pulled by the same moon. And the whispers in the corridors changed tone. Some said the queen was losing her grip. Others said she had finally learned peace. But the truth? She had learned fear, not of rebellion or scandal, but of fate, because fate, she knew, had a habit of visiting the people you love most. After the Festival of Waves, the capital returned to its slow, shimmering rhythm. Days drifted like lazy boats. The sea sparkled as if nothing in the world could ever change. But of course, something always does. It began with a ship, small, elegant, and painted white like a bird's wing. It came from the far northern isles, the ones where the wind bites and the nights stretch long. The people there were known for their traders, their carved wooden boats, and their ability to smile through storms. And on this particular ship came a stranger who would quietly tilt Amina's world again. His name was Arif. Not a prince, not a soldier, just a traveler, or so he said. He arrived with a merchant caravan, bringing fine spices, silk, and carved pearls for the royal market. But there was something about him that didn't quite fit the image of a simple trader. He carried himself with that easy confidence that comes from knowing more than you admit. The queen, always alert to newcomers, welcomed the northern merchants in the grand hall. The stranger stood among them, dressed modestly, but with eyes sharp as sea glass. When he bowed before the queen, his gaze flicked, just briefly, toward Amina. And in that tiny moment, something like recognition passed between them, though they'd never met. The court, of course, noticed. Courtiers have eyes like hawks for anything remotely interesting. But Amina didn't react. She simply nodded politely, as she did with everyone. Still, That evening, she found herself thinking about the stranger's eyes, calm, curious, and a little mischievous. Maybe it was nothing, or maybe it was the start of another ripple in her calm sea. A few days later, during a royal inspection of the market, their paths crossed again. Amina was walking with her attendants, smiling gently at the merchants and blessing the trade stalls, when a gust of wind caught her silk scarf and sent it floating down the pier. Before anyone could react, Arif, quick as a sailor, caught it before it could hit the water. He bowed as he handed it back. "The sea almost stole something beautiful," he said lightly. Amina smiled. "It takes what it likes. I just borrow things for a while." It was a small moment, almost forgettable. But sometimes it's the small moments that plant the deepest roots. Arif wasn't like the courtiers or nobles who tried to impress her with poems and compliments. He spoke simply, but with warmth. Over the following weeks, she began to see him around, not by accident, but not by design either. He'd be at the docks, checking cargo, or helping a boy fix a fishing net, or talking with palace workers like he'd known them for years. And people liked him. He was easy to be around, the kind of man who remembered names and laughed with his whole face. Even the palace guards, usually suspicious of strangers, started greeting him like an old friend. The queen, however, remained cautious. She didn't trust men who appeared ordinary, but carried a mystery behind their smiles. She asked her advisors quietly, "Who is this northern trader?" The reports came back vague. Honest merchant, good reputation, no trouble. But the queen's instincts whispered otherwise. Meanwhile, Amina and Arif's paths kept crossing, sometimes during charity visits, sometimes near the harbor gardens. They never met in secret. There was no need. Their connection wasn't a loud thing. It was gentle, slow, like waves touching the shore and then retreating again. He told her stories about the northern islands, of nights where the sea glowed blue, of birds that sang only during storms, of lighthouses that whispered to passing ships. In return, she told him about the capital, its coral palaces, its endless festivals, its people who treated every rumor like treasure. One day, they stood on the palace balcony overlooking the harbor. The sun dipped low, and the air smelled of salt and hibiscus. "Do you ever wish you could just sail away?" he asked quietly. Amina smiled. "Sometimes, but the sea wouldn't let me go. It's jealous like that." He chuckled. "Maybe it just wants to keep its favorite story close." It wasn't love yet. It was something lighter, a friendship that carried warmth, curiosity, and a touch of wonder. For the first time in a long while, Amina didn't feel watched or trapped. With Arif, she could breathe. She could laugh again, the kind of laugh that made the palace maids exchange surprised glances. But the queen saw it too, and her watchful eyes grew sharper. She began to notice how often Arif's name appeared in reports, how often Amina mentioned the harbor or the merchant's quarter. At dinner, the queen asked casually, "That northern trader, he seems to visit the palace grounds quite often, doesn't he?" Amina looked up calmly. "He brings fine spices, mother. The cooks love him." "Do you?" Amina paused, then smiled faintly. "I appreciate kindness when I see it. That's all." The queen didn't argue, but she didn't forget either. She ordered a quiet investigation, nothing harsh, just questions whispered through servants and harbor workers. What she found surprised her. Arif wasn't just a trader. He had once been a scholar, trained in the old languages, traveling between islands to collect stories and songs. Not dangerous, but clever. And clever men, in her experience, were the hardest to control. One evening, the queen invited him to dinner. It was a test, of course, a polite, smiling, royal test, the kind that looks like hospitality but feels like interrogation. Arif handled it gracefully. He spoke with humor, answered every question, and even managed to make the ministers laugh. The queen studied him carefully. He was calm, respectful, and impossible to read, just like her daughter. After he left, she told her advisor, "He's not ordinary." The advisor nodded. No one who makes the princess laugh ever is. Over the next few weeks, Amina's world grew quieter again, not because of distance, but because she started feeling the familiar weight of eyes on her. The queen's watchfulness had returned, steady as ever, but this time, Amina didn't resist it. She simply lived her days as if nothing were different, meeting Arif only in passing, speaking only in public.
It was a strange balance, affection wrapped in caution, curiosity tied with patience. Both of them knew that in a place where even the walls listened, silence was safer than secrets. As for the queen, she couldn't decide what troubled her more, the possibility of danger or the possibility that her daughter might finally be happy. So she waited, watched, and planned. Because in the palace, peace never lasts forever. And sometimes it's not storms or enemies that change a kingdom. It's a stranger with a smile and a princess who dares to return it. In a palace, silence is never really silent. Even when the halls seem still, the air hums with unspoken things, sighs, footsteps, half-finished sentences, and above all, whispers. It began small, like most storms do. A few servants noticed that the northern traders seemed to smile a little too warmly when the princess passed by. A few ministers noticed that the princess's usual calm had softened into something gentler. And soon, those small details turned into stories that spread faster than the ocean breeze. By the end of the week, everyone in the palace had their own version. Some said the princess had fallen for a mysterious traveler. Others said he had charmed her with northern songs. A few even claimed he was a spy pretending to be a merchant sent by rival islands to steal royal secrets. Because in a court, truth is just the seed. Gossip is the vine that grows around it. Amina, of course, heard the whispers. It was impossible not to. They followed her like shadows, soft, persistent, and always one step behind. When she walked through the corridors, conversations paused. When she entered the gardens, fans and papers suddenly needed adjusting. But she never reacted. Her face remained calm, her tone steady, her smile faint but real. Still, when she looked out over the sea at dusk, she sometimes whispered to the waves, "I wish people would talk about the moon for once." But the ocean only sighed, as if saying, "That's not how humans work." Arif noticed the change too. The palace guards became colder, the servants more cautious. When he came to deliver goods, the conversations around him grew shorter, more careful. He wasn't surprised. A man who'd traveled between islands knew how fast rumors spread. But this was different. Here, every whisper could reach the throne. The queen, naturally, heard them first. At first she dismissed them. After all, Amina was always kind to visitors. It was part of her charm. But when the whispers refused to fade, when they began reaching foreign ears, the queen decided silence was no longer safe. She summoned her advisor. "What are they saying exactly?" "That the princess and the northern trader share a fondness," the advisor said carefully. "Fondness," she repeated, the word tasting like salt. "And what proof?" "None, Your Majesty. Only stories." "Stories," she said. "Stories are how kingdoms fall." That evening, the queen attended dinner early. Amina arrived later, graceful as always. The queen smiled, too sweetly. "My dear, you've been spending quite some time at the harbor lately." "The cooks needed spices," Amina replied softly.
And only one man in the island sells them? Amina's eyes met hers, calm as a tide. Maybe he just sells them better. For a brief moment, silence thickened between them. Not angry, just heavy. Then the queen laughed lightly. You always did have an answer. I learned from the best, Amina said with a faint smile. It was the kind of exchange that sounds harmless to everyone else, but underneath, it rippled like a hidden current. The next few days, the palace buzzed louder. Ministers began suggesting new alliances, meaning potential royal matches for Amina. Foreign envoys arrived with gifts and flattery. It was a polite way of reminding everyone, especially the princess, that her heart wasn't entirely her own. Amina handled it gracefully, as she always did. She smiled, listened, thanked everyone, and promised nothing. But late at night, when the palace lights dimmed, she found herself walking to the balcony again, where the sea waited like an old friend. She whispered, "Why must people turn peace into stories?" The waves rolled in softly, like they were tired of explaining. Arif, meanwhile, faced his own kind of storm. His trading license was suddenly under review. The guards checked his goods twice instead of once. The officials who used to greet him warmly now offered stiff nods. He wasn't angry, just quietly disappointed. He knew what was happening. The palace was testing him, seeing how long he'd stay when the air turned cold. One afternoon, as he loaded crates near the dock, Amina appeared. No entourage, no guards, just her, wrapped in a light shawl against the wind. "You shouldn't be here," he said softly. "Neither should you," she replied, smiling. "The queen doesn't like visitors who stay too long." He chuckled. "Then maybe I'll leave before she remembers my name." Amina's eyes lowered. "If you do, take this." She handed him a small shell carved with the royal symbol. "So the sea remembers you." He took it carefully. "And if I stay, then the sea will remember me instead." It wasn't a promise, and it wasn't a goodbye. Just one of those gentle, unspoken moments that linger longer than any vow. But of course, nothing stays secret in a palace. By nightfall, the whispers grew bolder. Some claimed the princess met her lover in secret. Others swore the queen planned to exile the man. It didn't matter that most of it was nonsense. In courts, the truth doesn't have to be real, it just has to sound interesting. The queen acted quickly. She didn't shout, didn't scold. She simply called for Arif the next morning. "You are a guest of this kingdom. Guests are welcome, but guests also know when to leave." He bowed deeply. "I mean no harm to the crown." "I'm sure you don't," she replied, "but the crown must guard against harm even when it hides behind good intentions." It wasn't a threat, exactly. It was a warning wrapped in courtesy, the royal way of saying, "Go before I make you go." Arif nodded. "Then I will leave when my ship is ready." The queen inclined her head. That would be wise. And just like that, the rumor ended where most of them do, with polite smiles and sad eyes. When Amina heard, she didn't plead or argue. She simply accepted it, though her calm that day felt more like a mask than a mood. Her maid said she watched the sea for hours, as if trying to memorize every ripple. And when Arif's ship finally left the harbor, no one saw her wave, but some swore they saw a lone figure on the balcony, still as a statue, watching the sails disappear into the horizon. The whispers finally faded, replaced by new stories, new scandals, new distractions. But somewhere in the quiet of the palace, the sea still echoed with their voices, soft, distant, and endlessly patient. Because in the end, Whispers never truly die. They just sink deeper, waiting for the right tide to bring them back. Time moved differently after the trader's ship disappeared over the horizon. Days blurred together like waves that didn't bother counting themselves. The palace returned to its rhythm, the clinking of cups, the measured footsteps of guards, the hum of gossip that had already found new names to chew on. But something quiet had changed.
It wasn't loud enough for anyone to name, yet everyone could feel it, like the air after rain. Cleaner, but carrying a trace of sadness. Princess Amina still smiled. She still greeted the ministers, blessed the fishermen, and offered flowers to the sea temple. But her laughter had softened. It used to sound like sunlight through water. Now it sounded like memory. And the people, being people, noticed. They began to talk again, not cruelly this time, but curiously. "She's different," one servant whispered. "She's wiser," said another. "No," a third murmured. "She's lonelier." The court poets, ever hungry for meaning, began to write verses about her beauty and her calm. They called her the pearl who mourns the tide. The title stuck, and soon every guest who arrived at the island spoke of her not just as a princess, but as a mystery. Someone touched by the sea and tragedy both. Amina never asked for the nickname, but she didn't fight it either. Sometimes fame is just a shadow that follows you even when you stop walking. One morning, during a council meeting, a visiting scholar from the north offered the queen a set of rare scrolls, histories of other kingdoms written in silver ink. He was eloquent, sharp, and just young enough to be bold. When he saw Amina across the room, he bowed a little too deeply, and when he spoke, his words lingered on her side of the air. The queen noticed, of course. Queens always notice. But she said nothing. That night, Amina found one of the scholar's notes left outside her chamber door. Nothing improper, just a poem about the ocean and a pearl that refused to dull. Still, it made her smile in that quiet, cautious way of someone who's been burned by rumor before. She folded the note, placed it in her book of prayers, and whispered, "You shouldn't admire what you don't understand." Admiration, as it turned out, was a kind of curse all on its own. The scholar wasn't the only one drawn to her. Traders, envoys, even local musicians began visiting the palace with excuses thin as sea foam. One wanted to show her a rare shell. Another brought a song inspired by her kindness. A third simply wanted to see if the stories were true, if she really was as graceful as they said she was. Each one meant well, or at least thought they did. But good intentions have a way of turning heavy when mixed with pride and desire. And soon, what began as innocent admiration started to feel like worship. Wherever Amina went, eyes followed. When she prayed, someone would whisper. When she walked in the gardens, gifts appeared under the palm trees. Ribbons, letters, trinkets carved with her name. At first she laughed softly. "People are kind," she told her maid. But kindness became obsession. Obsession turned to jealousy. Two young officials quarreled over who would escort her at the island's festival. A singer from another island refused to perform unless she promised to attend. Even a guard, quiet and loyal, began sneaking glances that lasted too long. The queen grew uneasy. "This is what happens when people worship faces instead of deeds," she said to her advisor. The advisor nodded. "But yet, Your Majesty, it's a face they believe blessed." "Then let them remember," the queen said slowly, "that blessings can drown." Amina tried to calm the storm gently. She thanked admirers politely, but kept her distance. She spoke kindly, never cruelly. Yet no matter how softly she walked, the ground beneath her seemed to tremble. Because sometimes admiration isn't about the person admired. It's about the emptiness in those who admire. One evening, as the moon hung low, Amina visited the sea temple alone. The tide was high, brushing close to the marble steps. She placed a candle on the water and whispered, "May peace return where love has lost its way." The candle drifted out, flickering in the gentle current, and she watched it until it disappeared, a small glowing hope swallowed by distance. A few days later, one of the admirers, the young scholar, crossed a line he didn't realize existed. During a royal feast, emboldened by too much sweet wine, he recited a new poem in front of everyone. It wasn't just about the ocean this time. It was about her. The metaphors were obvious, the devotion unmistakable. The hall fell into that awkward hush when everyone heard something they wished they hadn't. Amina's smile didn't fade, but her fingers tightened slightly around her cup. The queen's eyes, calm but sharp, never left the poet's face. When he finished, she clapped once, polite, firm, final. "Your words are beautiful," the queen said, "but remember, the sea doesn't belong to anyone who names it." The poet bowed, his confidence shrinking like a wave meeting rock. After the feast, Amina found him near the courtyard, staring at the stars with regret written all over his face. "You have a gift," she said softly, "but you must learn when silence says more than poetry." He nodded, ashamed. "I meant no disrespect." "I know," she smiled. "That's the problem. People rarely mean the trouble they cause." She turned to leave, her shawl catching a bit of moonlight. Behind her, the poet whispered, "You make even mercy sound like warning." And maybe it was. As weeks passed, the scholar left the island quietly. Others stayed, others came, and the stories continued, gentler this time, but still humming beneath the surface. The queen finally told Amina, "My dear, perhaps it is not you who invites chaos. Perhaps it is beauty itself that tempts people to lose reason." Amina looked at her mother and said, "Then maybe I should stop being beautiful." The queen laughed softly. "If only it were that easy." Amina smiled too, though faintly. "Then I'll just try to be boring instead." The queen chuckled. "Impossible! The sea doesn't allow it." And the two women sat together in silence, listening to the waves tapping against the stone. Calm, endless, indifferent to all human admiration. Because no matter how many eyes turned toward the princess, the ocean kept reminding her of the same simple truth. Attention fades, but peace takes practice. Months drifted by like boats without a destination. The island slipped into a gentle rhythm again, predictable tides, steady trade winds, and gossip that finally grew tired of repeating itself. The queen was pleased. The court was calm. And Amina, well, she was peaceful, or at least pretending well enough that everyone believed her. She spent her mornings teaching village children near the temple, and her evenings walking by the sea, humming songs no one else remembered. It was quiet work, and she liked it that way. But peace, as the ocean always reminds us, doesn't last forever. One late afternoon, when the horizon was glowing that deep orange that only happens right before sunset, a sail appeared in the distance. Nothing unusual. Ships came often. But this one had a pattern on its flag that stirred something old in Amina's memory. A white spiral on a blue field. Northern make. Her heart gave one soft, surprised thump. By evening, word spread through the harbor like the smell of salt and spice. A trader had returned from the north, with treasures, stories, and an oddly familiar face. Arif. The man everyone had quietly forgotten was back.
He looked different, leaner, a little older, with sunburned skin and eyes that had seen storms, but the same calmness was there. The same voice that always sounded like he was halfway between a laugh and a sigh. When he stepped off the ship, Even the harbor guards who once gave him trouble nodded respectfully. Time, it seems, can soften even the sharpest suspicions. That night, the Queen's advisor hurried to inform her. "Your Majesty, the northern trader has returned." The Queen raised an eyebrow. "The same one?" "Yes, he brings gifts. He claims his journey was successful." The Queen thought for a long moment before replying. "Then let him bring his gifts. Let's see if time has made him wiser or bolder." Amina heard the news before the official announcement. She didn't ask questions, didn't show surprise, just stared out the window longer than usual. Her maid noticed and asked softly, "Should I prepare something special for the guest?" She smiled faintly. "No, let the Queen do the welcoming. I've already said my goodbyes once." But deep inside, her calm wasn't quite steady. The next day, the palace hall filled with people again. Ministers, merchants, envoys, everyone eager for a bit of distraction. Arif entered quietly, bowing low before the Queen. "Your Majesty, I return with gratitude and gifts from the Northern Isles." He opened a chest filled with coral beads, embroidered silk, and strange silver instruments that shimmered in the torchlight. The Queen studied him carefully. "You travel far," she said, "as traders must. And yet, you return here." Arif smiled gently, "as hearts sometimes do." It wasn't bold, just honest, but the room went very still for a second. The Queen's gaze softened, almost amused. "You speak well, merchant. The sea hasn't taken your tongue." He bowed again. "The sea teaches patience, not silence." Later that evening, when the crowd thinned and the torches burned lower, Amina finally crossed paths with him. It wasn't dramatic, no gasps, no music, just two people standing in the garden, looking at each other like they were remembering a song they once knew by heart. "You're late," she said softly. "I missed the wind, or maybe the island." "You should be careful with what you miss," she teased gently. "Sometimes it misses you back." He smiled, the same quiet smile she remembered. "I heard they call you the pearl who mourns the tide now." She rolled her eyes lightly. "People need titles for everything. It helps them sleep better." "Then maybe I should call you Amina, like before." She smiled. "Maybe you should." For a moment, it felt like no time had passed at all. Over the next few weeks, Arif's presence became part of the island again. He brought spices for the kitchens, traded stories with the guards, and repaired boats for the fishermen. Even the Queen couldn't deny that his return had brought prosperity. But prosperity comes with attention, and attention, as the princess knew well, never stays harmless for long. The ministers whispered again. "He's back for her." "Maybe he never left for trade," another replied. "Shouldn't someone remind him of the Queen's warning?" But the Queen remained silent. She was watching and waiting. One afternoon, the Queen called Amina to her chambers. The air was heavy with the scent of sandalwood. "My daughter," the Queen said softly, "the past has a way of returning when the present grows too quiet." Amina lowered her gaze. "He came to trade, Mother." "Perhaps. But you and I both know men don't cross oceans for spices alone." "I didn't ask him to." "I know," the Queen sighed. "That's what worries me." There was no anger in her voice, just weariness, the kind that only mothers of beautiful daughters ever truly understand. That evening, as the sun melted into the sea, Amina found Arif by the harbor, checking the ropes of his ship. "You plan to leave again?" she asked. He shook his head. "Not yet. The winds aren't right." "Or maybe you're waiting for permission?" she said, half smiling. He looked at her carefully. And if I am, then I'd tell you what the sea told me once, that waiting changes nothing, only tides do. They stood quietly for a while, watching fishermen pull in their nets. Arif finally said, I didn't come back to cause trouble. I know, Amina said gently. That's usually when trouble starts. A few nights later, a storm rolled in, sudden, fierce, as if the ocean itself had lost patience. Winds howled through the palms, rain drummed on rooftops, and lightning flashed over the harbor. At dawn, the palace guards found that one of the smaller ships had broken free and drifted out to sea. It wasn't Arif's main vessel, just a small boat he used for repairs. But when the queen heard, she called for him immediately. Your ship is lost, she said. He nodded calmly. Wood can be replaced. And hearts? She asked. He paused. Those too, in time. But some take longer. The queen studied him for a long moment, then said softly, Be careful, trader. You've walked these shores before. You know how quickly admiration becomes accusation. He bowed deeply. Yes, Your Majesty. And yet, here I am again. That night, Amina stood on her balcony, the wind still heavy with sea salt and memory. Below, the waves whispered their endless song, the same one they'd been singing since before she was born. She thought about how everything that leaves the island seems to come back, stories, people, storms, and she wondered whether it was fate or simply that no one ever really leaves the sea. Her candle flickered in the breeze. Somewhere in the distance, she heard the sound of a lute, faint and familiar, drifting from the harbor. And for the first time in a long while, she let herself smile. Not because she hoped, but because she remembered. After all, even enchantresses have hearts. They just hide them better than most. There's an old saying on the islands. When the sea gives, the throne trembles. Because good fortune never arrives without a few complications hiding in its shadow. For a while, the Queen's court glowed with the comfort of prosperity. Trade was strong, the people were happy, and the storms had passed. But behind that peace was something delicate, like silk stretched too tight. And at the center of that delicate balance stood Princess Amina, and the man who had once been told never to return. At first, the queen ignored it. She told herself that Amina had matured, that the trader was wiser now, that the past could stay buried if everyone pretended hard enough. But pretending has a short lifespan in a palace. It started with whispers again. A servant saw the princess near the harbor at sunset. A guard swore he heard music in the royal garden after midnight. And one night, someone claimed they saw the trader's shadow by the temple stairs. The queen didn't shout. She just sat a little longer in council, spoke a little less, and began to watch her daughter with quiet, worried eyes. Meanwhile, Amina lived as though walking a fine rope between duty and desire. She wasn't foolish. She knew what was at stake. But every time she passed the harbor, every time the wind carried the scent of salt and cinnamon, something deep in her stirred. Not longing, exactly, but recognition. It wasn't about Arif alone.
It was about the life that might have been hers if she weren't born behind palace walls, a life where choices weren't weighed, measured, and debated in secret meetings. Sometimes she envied the fishermen, their laughter echoing across the water. They could love, lose, or leave without reports being written about it. But for a princess, even silence could be misinterpreted. The queen's advisor, ever alert to change, finally spoke up one morning. "Your Majesty," he said softly, "rumors rise again." The queen sighed, rubbing her temple. "Rumors are like seaweed. Cut one strand and another grows." "Perhaps, but this strand has a name attached." The queen looked up sharply. "The traitor?" He nodded. "The people talk. Some even say the princess meets him in secret." The queen's voice turned cold. "Do you believe that?" The advisor hesitated. "I believe that the people believe it. And sometimes, Majesty, that's enough." That afternoon, the queen summoned Amina. The room was dim, the curtains drawn to keep out the harsh light. Amina entered quietly, her steps measured, her expression calm. "My daughter," the queen began, "the court is restless again. You know what they're saying." "Yes," Amina replied softly. "They always find something to say." "This is not about talk," the queen said, her voice firmer now. "This is about power. Every whisper that touches your name touches this throne." Amina looked up, eyes steady. "Then let them talk about the throne instead of me." The queen sighed. "Oh, if only it were that simple." Silence lingered between them, not angry, but heavy. The queen's tone softened. "You're not a child anymore, Amina. You must see how this looks." "I do," Amina said. "But sometimes what looks wrong feels right, and what looks right feels like a cage." The queen studied her for a long moment. "Do you love him?" Amina hesitated, her gaze drifting to the window. The sea glimmered in the distance, calm and endless. "I don't know," she said finally. "I only know that he listens when everyone else advises." The queen's expression flickered, sadness, understanding, and something else too. Fear, maybe. "Listening is easy," she said quietly. "Loyalty is harder." For the next 2 days, Amina stayed away from the harbor. She visited the temples, helped the healers, smiled for the courtiers. It was her way of trying to restore balance, of showing that she still understood her place. But peace doesn't come from avoidance, it comes from resolution. And resolution was exactly what the queen was preparing. One evening, the queen held a private council with her most trusted ministers. She said, "The time has come to arrange an alliance, a royal one." The room stirred. Everyone knew what that meant: a marriage. It was the traditional solution to every royal inconvenience: unite two houses, seal trade routes, silence gossip. And if a princess's heart had to be sacrificed in the process, well, that was the price of a peaceful throne. The queen didn't speak of love, she spoke of duty, lineage, and stability. But as she looked out the window toward the moonlit sea, her voice trembled slightly. "Sometimes," she whispered, "the crown demands what the heart cannot bear." A few nights later, Amina found out. She wasn't angry, just quiet. Her maid tried to comfort her. "Maybe the man you're promised to will be kind." Amina smiled faintly. Kindness isn't the same as freedom. That evening, she walked down to the beach alone. The moon hung low, turning the waves silver. She sat on a rock, listening to the ocean breathe, and whispered, "Do you ever get tired of coming and going, wave after wave?" The sea, of course, didn't answer. But behind her, a familiar voice did. "Maybe it's not tired. Maybe it just knows there's nowhere else to go." She turned. Arif stood there, half-shadowed, the wind tugging at his hair. "You shouldn't be here," she said softly. "Neither should you, yet here we are." They stood for a long while, saying nothing. Finally, Amina spoke. "They want me to marry someone I've never met." Arif looked at her, sadness flickering across his face. "You always belong to the sea, not the court, but even the sea answers to the moon." She smiled weakly. "And what are you then, a wave?" He chuckled softly. A mistake that keeps coming back. For a moment they laughed, quietly, helplessly. Then silence settled again, the kind that means too much to fill with words. When she returned to the palace, the queen was waiting in the corridor. Her expression was unreadable. "You were at the beach?" "Yes," Amina said. "With him?" Amina hesitated, then nodded. The queen closed her eyes briefly, then said, "You've left me no choice." It wasn't anger, it was resignation, the voice of someone who's loved enough to hurt and ruled long enough to hide it. Amina whispered, "Whatever you decide, I'll obey." The queen touched her cheek gently. "That's what frightens me, my child, that obedience has replaced joy." That night, as the island slept under a sky full of tired stars, two women, one bound by duty, the other by love, sat in separate rooms, both listening to the same sea. Each one wondering what the other truly wanted, each one afraid of the answer. Because in every kingdom, the hardest battles are the quiet ones, fought not with swords, but with choices. The palace always looked most peaceful before dawn, that quiet hour when even the sea seemed to hesitate, unsure whether to rise or rest. But beneath the calm marble floors, the weight of decision stirred. The queen had made her choice. A royal alliance. It was practical, wise, and politically perfect, the kind of decision history books praise, but hearts resent. She didn't want to hurt her daughter. But queens, like the sea, don't always get to choose what they destroy. By morning, word spread gently, not as gossip, but as a royal announcement. The princess of the Maldivian Isles was to be betrothed to Prince Rihan of Seren, a noble young man from a neighboring island known for his discipline and his wealth. The court applauded, the advisors smiled, the people whispered blessings. It was everything a kingdom could hope for. Except maybe the princess herself. Amina heard the news not from her mother, but from her maid whose voice trembled as she spoke. "The date is set, my lady, the first moon of the next season." Amina only nodded. She didn't cry, she didn't speak. She just closed the window and watched the horizon blur between sea and sky. Later that day, the queen came to her chamber. She didn't wear her crown, only a light shawl, the kind she wore when she wanted to be a mother, not a monarch. "Amina," she began softly, "I did this to protect you, to protect us." Amina turned slowly. "From what, mother? From love? From rumors? From being human?" The queen sighed. "From weakness. The throne cannot afford it." There was no anger in Amina's face, only exhaustion.
She walked to the window and said quietly, "Sometimes I think the throne demands too much. It takes and calls it duty. And yet," the queen replied gently, "it is all we have." Amina looked at her, not as a daughter, not as a princess, but as a woman finally seeing another woman's burden. For a moment, pity replaced frustration. "You've been lonely too, haven't you?" she whispered. The queen smiled sadly. "Every ruler is. It's the only thing we're allowed to own." Meanwhile, down at the harbor, the news reached Arif in a less graceful way. A fisherman mentioned it between laughs, thinking it was old news. "The princess is to marry a prince. Big celebration coming, they say." Arif froze mid-laugh. "A prince?" "Yes, from Sarun. Rich, handsome, everything the sea could want." Arif forced a smile. Then may the sea bless them both. He finished his work quietly that day. The laughter around him carried on, but his heart had already gone silent. That evening, as the palace prepared for the engagement ceremonies, music, banners, and all the polite happiness money could buy, Amina walked alone through the royal gardens. The air smelled of jasmine and rain. Her footsteps made almost no sound on the stone path. She reached the edge of the wall overlooking the harbor, and there, in the fading light, she saw him. Arif stood near his ship, a faint silhouette against the gold water. He didn't move, didn't wave, just looked toward the palace like someone memorizing a view before leaving it behind. Something in her chest tightened, not sadness exactly, more like recognition. They both knew what silence meant now. The next morning, Arif requested an audience with the queen. Not to beg, not to protest, just to say goodbye. The guards hesitated, but the queen allowed it. Perhaps she respected his courage, or perhaps she wanted to end things with grace. When he entered the grand hall, he bowed deeply. "Your Majesty," he said, "I came to thank you for your hospitality, your patience, and your wisdom." The queen regarded him quietly. "And what of your intentions?" He smiled faintly. "They've changed with the tide. I came as a trader, I leave as a man reminded of his place." The queen's eyes softened slightly. "Then you've learned what many never do." He nodded. "I have. I have no anger, Your Majesty. Only gratitude." The queen inclined her head. "Then go with peace. The sea has more mercy than courts ever will." He bowed again and left. No drama, no final words, just footsteps fading down the marble hall. When Amina found he was gone, she didn't run to the docks. She didn't cry by the window. She simply sat still, the way people do when they've felt too much to feel anything more. Her maid said softly, "He's leaving before the storms return." Amina nodded. "He's wise to do so." And that was all she said. The engagement celebration came soon after. Drums echoed through the palace, candles floated in the reflecting pools, and the islanders danced in the streets. The queen smiled, radiant and proud. The prince was charming, polite, and utterly unthreatening, everything a court could want from a royal husband. And Amina? She smiled too, not out of joy, but because everyone expected her to. Her new fiancé bowed and said, "I've heard much about your kindness." "And I about your patience." Both compliments, both shields. As they stood before the crowd, the queen felt something she hadn't expected. Not victory, not relief, but a quiet ache. Because even when you win for the right reasons, loss has its own way of showing up uninvited. That night, long after the music faded and the lanterns burned low, Amina slipped out to the balcony again. The sea was calm, too calm, as if holding its breath. She could almost see a tiny sail in the distance, vanishing into the horizon. She whispered to the waves, "Tell him I didn't forget. Tell him I just obeyed." The waves didn't answer, but one small gust of wind brushed her cheek, light, fleeting, almost like a hand that once held hers. Amina smiled faintly. Maybe it was only the wind. Maybe not. By dawn, the island was alive with talk of new beginnings, alliances, and a bright royal future. But in the quiet corners of the palace, where the sea's whisper still lingered through the windows, the princess and her mother both understood the truth. Peace always has a price, and sometimes that price is the heart that bought it. Sometimes the sea just takes things. Boats, shells, letters, even memories. It doesn't ask. It just swallows them quietly, like it knows what's best. Months had passed since the royal engagement, and on the surface, everything looked perfect. The palace gleamed brighter than ever. The queen smiled more. The people sang new songs about the future. But under all that glitter, Something had changed. The air felt heavier. The laughter didn't last as long. And every morning when the tide rolled out, it seemed to take a little more color from the world. Amina had learned how to move through her days like a shadow, calm, graceful, polite. She spoke softly, she smiled when expected, she nodded at the right times. But her eyes had grown quiet. Some said she was maturing. Others whispered she was fading. Every evening she still went to the same balcony, still watching the horizon. The sea didn't answer her anymore, or maybe it did, but too gently to hear. Prince Rihan tried to understand her silence. He was kind, perhaps too kind, the sort of man who apologized to doors he bumped into. He brought her gifts, pearls, perfumes, even a tiny silver mirror. He said once, "It reminded me of you." Amina looked into the mirror and saw only her reflection. For some reason, it made her feel lonelier. "It's beautiful," she said softly, setting it aside. He smiled again, not realizing that beauty was the one thing she'd grown tired of. Meanwhile, whispers began floating through the royal corridors again. Strange ones. Servants claimed to see the princess walking the gardens at night, speaking softly to no one. Others said they heard singing, a low, haunting tune that came from the sea but sounded like her voice. The queen brushed it off. Stories. People talk when they're bored. But deep down, she felt that same unease, the kind that creeps in when the wind shifts right before a storm. One night the queen found her daughter standing barefoot near the shore. The moon was full and the waves reached almost to her feet. She looked like part of the ocean, pale, still, almost glowing. "Amina," the queen said, stepping closer, "you'll catch a chill." Amina didn't move. She just whispered, "Do you hear it?" "Hear what?" "The sea," Amina said softly. "It's calling again." The queen frowned. "The sea doesn't call, my dear. It crashes, it hums, it flows, but it doesn't call." Amina turned her head, eyes half-lidded like in a dream. "Then why do I feel it in my chest?" The queen wanted to argue, but words fell apart in her throat. She just took her daughter's hand, cold, trembling slightly, and led her back toward the palace. That night the queen couldn't sleep, because sometimes mothers know when something is about to be lost, even if no one says it out loud.
One morning, the palace awoke to strange news. The tides had receded farther than anyone remembered. Boats sat half buried in the sand, and the coral beds were suddenly bare and dry. Fishermen said it was unnatural. "The sea's holding its breath," they murmured. The queen ordered prayers, offerings, rituals, anything to calm the ocean's strange silence. But as the day went on, the sky grew dim, even though the sun was still there, hidden behind a pale, eerie light. And when the evening came, so did the storm. It wasn't a normal storm. The wind didn't howl, it whispered. The rain didn't pour, it wept. The waves didn't crash, they rose slowly, like arms reaching for something lost. And in the middle of it all, when thunder rose softly like distant drums, Amina disappeared. Her maid said she had gone to bed early. The guards swore no one left the gates. Yet, by dawn, her chambers were empty, the bed untouched, the window open, and a faint trail of sand across the marble floor. On her desk lay only one thing, a note. Just a few words written in calm, steady ink. "The sea remembers what we forget." The queen didn't cry in front of anyone. She stood at the balcony, staring at the restless waves. No ships were missing, no footprints led to the shore. It was as if her daughter had simply drifted away. The palace declared it a disappearance, then a tragedy, then eventually a legend. Some said she drowned, others said she ran away. But the old fishermen, the ones who knew the sea best, just shook their heads. No, they said, the ocean called her home. Years passed. The story softened. The queen grew older, her hair silver like the moonlight on water. She never remarried, never spoke of the storm again. But every full moon, she went to the same balcony, the one facing the horizon, and left a single lantern burning until dawn. Locals said sometimes, when the tide was right, a faint song drifted across the water. Soft, familiar, almost human. And if you listened closely, you could hear the waves answering, like two voices still trying to reach each other through time. And so the Maldivian Enchantress became more than a royal name. She became a whisper carried by the sea, a reminder that some loves aren't meant to stay on land. They say the sea never gives back what it takes, but maybe, sometimes it doesn't have to. Maybe it just keeps it safe, beneath the waves, where memory doesn't hurt anymore. Soft ocean sounds return, fading like a lullaby. And that's how the story of Princess Amina began to vanish, not as a scandal, not as a tragedy, but as a tide slowly retreating into legend. Because every story has to rest eventually, even the ones the sea refuses to forget. The sea has a funny way of keeping secrets. It doesn't hide them, it just folds them into its rhythm. Tide in, tide out, whisper, rest, and repeat. And before long, stories become songs. It had been years since Princess Amina vanished. The kingdom carried on, as kingdoms always do. New rulers came, new walls were built, and the world slowly forgot the girl who once spoke to the sea. But the sea didn't forget. It never does. Fishermen began to tell strange tales again, not wild or frightening, more like sleepy confessions whispered after midnight. They said that on certain calm nights, when the moon hung low and red over the horizon, they could hear singing, a soft, wordless melody floating over the waves. One old man described it like this: it wasn't loud. It was like the sea was humming to itself. And if you listened too long, you forgot you were supposed to be afraid. No one knew where it came from, but the tune was always the same. Gentle, slow, almost like a lullaby that the ocean was humming back to the shore. At first, people dismissed it as wind through coral caves, or maybe whales calling from far away. But then someone claimed to have seen something, a light beneath the water, a soft blue glow just under the surface, moving gracefully along the current. Too slow for a fish, too fluid for a boat. One young sailor swore he saw a figure, a woman with long hair floating like seaweed, her face peaceful, her hands folded as if in prayer. He told the story in a tavern, wide-eyed and shaking. The others laughed, but one older fisherman just nodded and said, the sea still sings for her. Soon the legend grew. Island mothers began to tell their children bedtime stories about the enchantress of the tides, the princess who fell in love with the sea and became its voice. They said she guarded lost sailors and calmed storms that threatened the islands. Whenever a fishing boat made it home safely after rough waters, the men would say, "She must have been watching." In time, the story stopped being sad. It became something gentle, a tale told to sleepy kids under mosquito nets, while rain tapped softly on thatched roofs. "Close your eyes," mothers would whisper, "and listen. If the waves sing tonight, it means she's near. It means the sea is calm." Generations passed. The palace where Amina once lived crumbled slowly into coral dust. The kingdom itself changed, rulers, names, even languages. But her story stayed. Old songs carried her name, though no one remembered who she really was. Just Amina of the sea, the lady who could make the ocean listen. And every so often, a traveler or a diver would claim they saw strange things near the reefs. A silver-combed cotton coral, a shimmer of silk deep underwater, or the faint outline of a woman in the reflection of the moonlit tide. Nothing scary, nothing cruel, just quiet reminders, like the sea gently saying, "I still remember." There's one story that still circulates in the northern atolls. An old diver named Salim once told it to a group of tourists who didn't believe in anything that couldn't be photographed. He said that years ago, while exploring a submerged ruin, he found a carved stone, smooth, white, still cold to the touch, and on it, a single word, peace. He looked up through the green-blue water and swore he saw a faint light above him moving with the current, almost like someone was watching. He didn't panic. He said it felt warm, safe, like the sea was breathing around him, not dangerous, but alive. When he surfaced, the storm clouds that had been gathering all morning had suddenly drifted apart. The ocean had gone completely still. Salim smiled, patted the side of his boat and said, "She's still here, just quieter now." Some say the Queen's lantern still burns beneath the water. A piece of it, maybe, some enchanted coral or spirit flame. Others say the light is Amina herself, guiding lost sailors through dark tides. And maybe none of it's true. But the funny thing about legends is that they don't need to be. They just need to be beautiful enough to keep. Now, if you ever visit the Maldives, the far islands, the quiet ones, ask the locals about the singing sea. They'll smile politely, maybe even laugh. But after dark, when the wind dies down, you'll see them light small lamps near the water, just in case. They don't say it's for her, they just say it's for good tides. But everyone knows what that means. Even scientists, divers, and historians who visit these islands talk about how oddly peaceful the sea feels there.
They measure currents and salinity, take notes, record sounds. Sometimes they pick up faint tones on their underwater recorders, long, slow, melodic waves that shouldn't exist. They file it under ambient marine resonance. But deep down, maybe they wonder too. Maybe they think, just for a second, what if the sea really remembers? And that's the thing about stories like Amina's. They start as history, kings, queens, names, dates. Then they turn into myth, songs, whispers, bedtime tales. And finally, they become something softer, a feeling that somewhere out there, someone loved so deeply that even the ocean couldn't let them go. So when the tide rises tonight and the waves sound a little more musical than usual, don't be afraid. It's probably just the wind. Or maybe it's her, still singing, still remembering, still part of the world she never truly left. As the ocean rests again, so does her story. Not gone, just sleeping. Because even legends need quiet dreams. Every story, no matter how grand or mysterious, has to quiet down one day, like the sea after a storm, or a candle that knows when to dim. And the story of Princess Amina, the Enchantress of the Maldives, had become exactly that, a whisper. Centuries had passed since anyone last saw her. The old palaces were gone, buried beneath coral and sand. New kingdoms had risen and fallen. Tourists came now, chasing sunsets instead of myths. But yet, somehow, her presence lingered. Not in marble, not in memory, but in something softer. The rhythm of the waves, the hush between tides, the way the moonlight still seemed to pause above certain shores.
Locals said there were nights when the ocean turned glass smooth, so still it looked like time itself had stopped. That's when they claimed you could hear it, the faint hum, the sea song. It wasn't scary, it wasn't even sad, just familiar. Like hearing someone you once loved laugh in another room. One old boatman said, "When the sea sounds like it's breathing slow, that's her resting. She's done wandering now." He said it with a small smile, as if proud of her. Historians tried to trace her story, of course. They looked through half-broken scrolls, royal records, oral tales from tiny atolls. They found fragments, a royal daughter, a strange disappearance, a queen's grief. But they could never prove anything beyond that. One professor even wrote in her notes, maybe she didn't disappear. Maybe she just changed places, from history to myth. And maybe that's what most stories do when they've been loved long enough. They stop being facts and start being comfort. Modern Maldivians, especially on the smaller islands, still honor her in their own quiet ways. A shell left at the edge of the tide, a whispered wish before a long voyage, a song hummed by mothers to sleepy children. No one calls her the Enchantress anymore. Now she's just Amina of the sea. A friend, a guardian, a name you can whisper to the waves when you're scared and want the water to stay calm. One evening, during the monsoon season, a group of young divers anchored near an old coral ridge, known locally as Amina's Rest. The sea was unusually calm that night, strange for that time of year. As they prepared their equipment, one diver noticed something glowing faintly beneath the surface. It wasn't bright, more like moonlight trapped under the water. Curious, he dived down. He found nothing but coral, fish, and sand. But when he surfaced, he said he heard a voice, soft, distant, and wordless, humming through the water. He laughed about it later, said it was just the echo of his own heartbeat in the mask. Still, he stayed quiet for a long moment after telling the story, because some echoes don't sound like your own. The ocean around the Maldives is one of the clearest in the world. From above, it looks like liquid glass, the color of a dream you can almost touch. But beneath that beauty are ancient layers of silence, the kind that remembers everything. And maybe that's where her story sleeps now, not buried, not forgotten, just resting in the deep. Every time a wave folds over itself, every time a reef glows in the moonlight, the sea retells her story, without words, without sorrow, just motion, just memory. Some say she still visits, not as a ghost or a spirit, but as light, a shimmer on the water when there's no moon, a spark that follows lost ships home. It's said that those who see her never feel afraid at sea again. The ocean can be cruel sometimes, but not where she rests. There, the water is always gentle. Fishermen who pass over the spot often toss flowers into the water, not for luck, not for superstition, just out of respect. Because even in legend, kindness deserves to be remembered. The queen, the one who lost her daughter to the sea, has her own legend too. It's said that in her final days she asked to be buried near the shore, where the tides could reach her. Her tombstone carried no royal title, only 3 words, Mother of the Sea. And some nights, when the waves roll just right, the water glows faintly around that spot, like 2 old souls finally resting side by side. Over time, scholars stopped calling it a mystery. The people stopped calling it a tragedy. It simply became
part of the islands themselves, a song without a singer, a love story without an ending, and a reminder that sometimes the things that vanish aren't gone, they've just found quieter places to stay. So tonight, if you ever find yourself near the ocean, maybe far from home, maybe a little lost, listen closely. Let the wind slow down. Let the waves breathe in and out. And if you hear something soft, something like a sigh between the tides, don't worry. It's probably just the sea. Or maybe it's her, still singing, still watching, still keeping her promise to never let the islands sleep alone. Every story we tell eventually drifts into silence. But silence doesn't mean the story ends. Sometimes it's just the sea taking a breath before whispering the next one. So let this story rest now. Close your eyes. The ocean is calm tonight. And somewhere in the deep blue quiet, the princess of the tides is finally home.